Okay. It just... We really don't need that.
We don't need it.
No,
but
we don't.
Maybe we want it?
Oh my goodness. Alright. Hi everyone. Welcome to our third episode from the Loresworn Order.
Podcast. That's actually in the official style manual. You're supposed to whisper the word podcast.
So today we have all of us here. TJ is here, Brianna is here, DM is here, and I am here. We've got a bunch of new stuff to talk about today. We kind of wanted to focus this podcast around the idea of alternate history and how to make good stories with alternate history. So we all, as a house, watched The Man in the High Castle, and a couple of us actually went to go see Pride and Prejudice and Zombies opening weekend, which was hilarious.
Which isn't so much alternate history as it is...
It's like fantasy alternate history, which is...
It still sort of falls there.
Yeah,
it's like,
yeah.
What if there had been a zombie apocalypse in the days of Jane Austen.
I actually thought that it was a...
Jane era.
It was...
Same era.
No, I actually thought it was a very clever bit of world building. That was really the highlight of it to me.
It was,
yeah.
and I suppose you could definitely say, well, no Jane Austen novel ever happened. They all could have happened.
Yeah. So it kind of works. They did a really interesting job, I thought, of sort of updating all of the problematic sexist parts of Jane Austen into a very interesting alternative.
The thing about
which was still
history
weird.
is, in order to avoid
Anachronism, you've got to be true to it to some degree.
Yeah.
When you're discussing it, when you're setting fiction in it, and I mean, as much as I think it's shameful, like human history is far from perfect, but racism and sexism were kind of a thing for most of it, and still are actually very much a thing. And it's important that you speak, especially when you're writing or designing in a historical setting. You've got to speak that language. You've got to deal with it, or give a good reason for it to be different. And what I liked about the movie was it legitimately empowered its female characters. As rather than pretend that Victorian England was a progressive setting, which I've seen some Jane Austen adaptions, and it's ridiculous because it wasn't. Instead, it's like, no, these are the warriors in society.
I think Jane Austen is probably what passed for feminism at the time she was writing.
She was really trying.
But
her
yeah, by
characters
today's
like Elizabeth,
standard,
they suffered for being uppity.
They were never triumphantly powerful.
Yeah.
The reason I always give for why I was never able to enjoy those books is it's just about rich people being mopey in the English countryside.
Well, no, but they weren't rich. They weren't rich.
Well, they weren't rich.
They weren't. No, they weren't. They were about to lose their house.
They were about to lose their house, but they had a house.
No perspective. They were industrial age Victorian.
Okay, no, that's
they
fair.
owned a manor. They were in the upper echelon.
Like beyond middle class.
Yeah.
They owned a manor. They're rich.
Yeah.
They're in the 1% of England.
Yes, they were. They were mopey because they were about to be kicked out of the 1%.
By Parson Collins.
Yeah.
Upon the death of Mr. Bennett.
Who, by the way, was a hilarious person in this movie.
Matt Smith
stole that movie.
My
played
gosh.
Mr. Collins, and he was excellent. Yeah.
He stole that movie as far as I was concerned. Every time he was on screen, it was just like a laugh riot.
Oh my gosh, such a creeper. And yet so funny, and obviously...
Just won't stop talking. It was great.
Would you like a scone?
It was just great. It was a great movie, and
I do... Okay, spoiler alert for anybody who's listening. You can fast forward for like 5 minutes. But there's the ending I actually kind of want to talk about because I really wish they had the guts to do what I thought they were going to do.
Yes, I know exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah, but then it's not an adaptation.
Well, it would have been so good.
It could still be an adaptation because, all the zombie shit was not from the original novel.
So if you're still listening, you have been warned. Spoiler alert. Basically, it is my opinion they should have just killed Mr. Darcy.
Yes, I agree.
When he was about to
die. For an original work and a better script, yes, but it would not have been Pride and Prejudice.
Yes, it would have been like 99% Pride and Prejudice. It's just the last 5 minutes were different,
The
and
ending is
Elizabeth
kind
would
of
have been happy
important.
for her sister to get married, and then Elizabeth would have led the charge against the coming zombie apocalypse.
Yeah, which I can kind of see that they wanted to keep it a little bit more lighthearted, but if I had been the writer-director, I would have gone
They're
dark.
like, yes,
dark
Darcy
with it
is
at the
dead.
end.
You want
Just
to talk
to-
about darkness? There was no charge being led against the zombie
That's
apocalypse.
true, they
The
were all just
zombies
about to
won.
get wiped out.
The zombies
That's
were,
true.
It can't even be debated. They won.
Which kind of boggles my mind that Mr. Darcy didn't bother to, like, bash in Wickham's head. Like, zombie fighting
They
101.
were trying to get.
Why did he not bash in Wickham's
They were
head?
trying to get over the bridge.
So you
and-
can't take an extra 10 seconds when
No.
you get him down to just be like,
No, when dawn is coming and your bridge out of Zombieland is about to be detonated, you get the hell out of
Wait,
there.
if we're thinking about this in Dungeons and Dragons terms, he had one standard action, one move action, and one minor action. If he had taken the time to do an attack, he wouldn't have been able to do a double move to get,
No, he would not have.
oh
get
my
out
god,
of
he
harm's
didn't really
way.
have
Yeah.
enough time to get out of harm's way anyway because he almost died.
That's
No,
true.
Well,
Slash,
it goes
he
to
was
show 10
buried under
seconds was
rubble.
kind
He
of
should
critical.
have been dead.
Which goes to show 10 seconds was really kind of critical. It would have been even more unsafe on the other side of that bridge. With all the hungry, angry English people undead. Which is a terrifying thought when you think about it.
Yeah.
Semi-aware,
It's like common
Victorian
sense come to
era,
life.
lower
English
class
peasants.
English peasants.
Yeah.
Oh, that should be the next one. Common sense and zombies.
What? Why would we? So we adapt Thomas Paine's
Yes.
Revolutionary.
So it's
It'll
like
be
they...
the zombie cookbook.
that
It's a
wasn't-
zombie cookbook.
That wasn't a novel. It was a
I
philosophical
know.
treatise.
Well, you
on-
could do the
It would
American
still be
Revolution
funny.
with zombies.
Yeah, you can.
And like the one of the like the French don't help them, but they figure out a way to turn the zombies against the redcoats and win their independence. But then they have to figure out what to do because there's all these zombies now.
What would that be based off of? We're talking about.
The American
I
Revolution.
like the idea. Somebody out there needs to make a Thomas Paine and zombies. I think
Thomas-
it would be fun.
What? Why does Thomas Paine star in the zombie?
He's the
writing-
zombie. He's the zombie writing the zombie cookbook. Common sense.
Wait,
I don't.
that plot needs some serious friggin' work.
I think that's really reaching.
Y'all lost me like 5 minutes
I could
ago.
see if Thomas Paine was like writing pamphlets about how to fight zombies. That could work.
Yeah.
But that wasn't the point of what he was writing.
No, the point.
No.
Exactly. That is my point.
But he also was not writing cookbooks.
That's true.
No, he was writing philosophical treatises on the right to fight for independence. It's purely political. It's philosophical.
Am I thinking of the wrong thing? I'm thinking of
Yes,
the thing where
you
he's
are.
talking about eating like orphan children.
No, that is
That's Jonathan Swift.
Jonathan Swift. I was totally thinking of the wrong thing. I'm thinking
A
of
Modest
Jonathan Swift.
Proposal.
A Modest Proposal is what I was talking about.
Okay,
And A Modest
yeah.
Proposal as a zombie cookbook totally makes sense.
Yeah.
Apologies to my history buffs for
It
getting
took us
those names
5
wrong.
minutes to get there.
I was so confused. I was like, why
tragic
is this a bad
minutes.
idea? This is an amazing idea.
5 tragic minutes. I'm so confused.
No, it's an amazing idea. That is an amazing idea. Mr.
So what did
Swift-
you guys think of The Man in the High Castle?
All right, speaking of a twist.
That derailed really bad.
Speaking of a twist, it's the last time I ever try to make smart comments. All right.
Probably a good idea.
Hey, I make your dinner. Be careful.
Some of them.
I make the others so I can.
So yeah.
So it's
it's
So
okay.
what did you guys
I can
think
edit it.
of The Man in the High Castle?
So transitioning to... So our other historical fiction that we consumed for this podcast was The Man in the High Castle, which was one of the highest rated TV shows of last year. So we figured we should look at it. And frankly, TJ is working on his Chronicle, which is going to be a lot of sort of alternate history.
Yes.
So that was actually our secret reason for why we wanted to get all of these together.
Without the fantastical element.
The alternate history episode.
So Man in the High Castle.
Yeah.
Liked it, loved it, hated it.
I liked it.
I really liked it. There were some flaws with it, but once again, I thought the world building was fantastic. I thought the little details they had. I guess we should intro for those who have never heard of it by saying it's basically it's an alternate history. It takes place in the 1960s after the Axis won World War II. So Japan controls like the western half of the U.S., Germany controls the eastern half, and it's kind of...
The flyover states in the middle are kind of an anarchical DMZ.
The meta plot is basically that Hitler's about to die, and the Japanese are worried that the Germans are going to invade the West Coast because they are, and kind of has lots of
the treaty that they had worked out is starting to sort of unravel because the Germans really want the entire world, and the Japanese realize they're not actually technologically able to beat the Germans.
They're not an equal partner in that alliance.
Kind of like in real World War II, when Germany promised part of Poland to the Soviet Union and then decided that they wanted that back, and also the Soviet Union.
Just kidding. We'll take everything.
Well, I forget who said it, but I believe there is a quote by like some Nazi official saying it's just implying that the alliance of the Axis powers was one of convenience. That in the game of world domination, there are no partners.
Yeah.
So
there's actually a really interesting map out there. If I can find it and link it in the article.
I forget who said that.
The article version of this. There's a map of what the world would look like if all of the land that the Nazis believed that was theirs had been claimed by the German Reich, and it's like almost everything. So
they were not interested in a Cold War, a sharing of the world. And one of the things that's interesting about The Man in High Castle, though, is a lot of the setup is built to sort of support this fantastical, almost science fiction B-plot. In the novel, it's straight fantasy. There's a little bit more of a science fiction-y tinge to it in the television series. These films / in the novel, it's a novel.
Mm-hmm.
In the TV series, it's films. It's films of depicting the actual timeline where the Allies won the World War. And it's interesting. From my perspective, it seems like a majority of the world building that goes into it, while creative, is sort of set up to serve this sort of end game plot of these movies / these books being important. Because I just don't see. Alternate history would not have unfolded The Man in High Castle way. It's almost completely and entirely implausible. Interesting, but implausible.
Well, I think the divergence points that they used, because I was reading up a little bit on the show wiki, it's basically FDR gets assassinated and Werner Heisenberg agrees to build the atom bomb
and gets it done
for the Germans, which those are like the two huge things that are different from our reality that basically allowed them to win. Because like they nuke Washington D.C. and then invade the U.S.
Well, then the lack of Lend-Lease and stuff looms large. I see really no way Japan and Germany don't go to war if Germany has a nuke and Japan doesn't. I mean, do we really see Hitler holding that back?
Unless the Germans, which is implied strongly throughout the show, that the Germans kind of used the Japanese to subdue the Pacific coast.
I'm saying
so that the cleanup would have been easier.
They have their reasons. I'm just saying I think that they're implausible. Mostly to serve the meta plot of The Man in High Castle and the films and the sort of fantastical elements, which is going to be extremely interesting to see what the TV show does, because they have parted from the book almost entirely, frankly. Spoiler alert.
Yeah, well, in the end, the TV show spends most of its time, because we keep hearing about The Man in the High Castle, but most of the show is not actually about that.
Well, and
it's not even really actually about the films. It's about the people trying to get the films.
See, and I thought the last few episodes were the weakest of the season because of that, and we kind of discussed, I think, DM, it was you originally presented this theory, and I think you're right that they got renewed partway through the season or something like that, and then ended up having to rewrite the last few episodes.
That would make sense to me. That would make sense to me, because it definitely felt like they were on the road to an ending, and then they
undid a bunch of
stuff. One of the coolest plot elements in the first few episodes, which I thought like the first 2/3 of the season was actually a lot better than the last 1/3, was like building up this mystery of like almost Wizard of Oz moment of, are we going to meet the Man in the High Castle? And then spoilers, you don't. And I thought that was kind of disappointing, and they made the last few episodes more about these 3 specific characters who are like
setting up a
unfortunately-
second season, frankly.
going on all these adventures that don't really make any sense and doing things that don't make sense or any kind of logic just to set up more conflict. Like the way that the protagonist behaved in the last 3 episodes were like, I didn't believe it at all.
The reason for my theory is it became less about telling a coherent story and more about getting a season done. There were more setups for a second season becoming apparent. The focus on telling a contained, coherent story was around episode 7. I want to say was pretty much completely jettisoned, and that was disappointing.
And it's not all that uncommon now that I think about it that a lot of times the characters the show most wants you to care about are not the ones you end up caring about the most.
Yeah.
Like I kind of thought the Obergruppenführer, his storyline, he's like the American Nazi officer. His storyline in the last few episodes was a lot more interesting than what was going on.
It was downright compelling
with the main quote-unquote main characters.
I would not have, to be quite honest with you, it's funny, I loved every tertiary character in that show.
The supporting cast is fantastic.
And would not have cared an iota if the main 3 characters got shot.
Yeah.
Like, would have actually been like, the show got better just then.
One of them would get shot just to raise the stakes a little bit.
Yeah.
Because so far, one of my biggest problems with this show is that even though we have this like looming menace of the Nazi presence and the Japanese presence, all of our main characters are perfectly safe. Like
unless they put
ridiculous
themselves
things.
in harm's way.
And even then, they're fine.
Repeatedly.
Even then, they're fine.
Yeah.
And they should, like, not even losing a finger. Like, literally, they need to at least lose a limb or something. I'm sorry.
Well, it's a good point. Narratively, you need consequences to bad actions in order to keep the stakes of life or death conflict alive, or else it just ceases to become believable.
Not even bad actions, just consequences to risks, consequences to taking a risk.
And I think part of it might be that they're too good. Like it's a world with like all these shades of gray, and you're dealing with like lesser evils and really kind of conflicted dark people. And the main 3 characters just haven't. I mean, they're too textbook heroic. They haven't really done anything selfish or dark. The one of them was about to do something really selfish and dark. He decides not to at the last minute. Like, well, I think that's why they're less interesting.
Let's just open this up. So, spoiler alert.
Yeah.
Now we're going to get into details of the story.
That's
so
why I thought.
So, if you want to watch the show, now would be a good time to skip ahead a little bit.
Right, but yeah.
So, no, I do. I think the lead girl, I can't remember what her name is because she was so uninteresting to me.
She was the worst character.
Generic American brown-haired heroine.
Jane?
Yeah.
It's not Jane.
It's like Julia.
Julia,
yeah.
She did do several things that were incredibly selfish throughout the whole. Like she abandons her boyfriend to
That's
German
true.
interrogators,
and has every reason to Japanese interrogators.
Japanese, sorry.
Yeah.
But then she doesn't ever really seem to care that she did that.
Exactly, exactly. And
she's not conflicted about it.
I wanted there to be consequences. I wanted her boyfriend to dump her because
he should have.
Who puts up with that?
Holy crap, he should have. Like there is a 0% chance that if I have a bus ticket that is going to get myself and my significant other out of Nazi-occupied territory. Were they in New York or were they in the Pacific?
They're in the Pacific.
Okay, so out of fascist crazy land, and my significant other says to me, no, let's not do that. Let's go ransom a Nazi spy from the Yakuza who saved my life. I would say, you're nuts. I'm getting on the bus. You can come with me or not. But there is a 0% chance I'm going to go save the Nazi spy from the Yakuza.
I'm not going to lie, too. It's to me, it's life for life economics. I don't care that you want to save this guy. I consider it payback for the sister and niece and nephew you got killed. Get on the bus or die. I don't care.
Yeah.
Like,
and
she's a horrible human being, but the show wants us to think that she's not, which is a little disingenuous.
The boyfriend, however, was interesting, and I felt I was a little bit. I was interested that they pulled him back from actually assassinating the Japanese prince because he was so torn up after she left him there and after they killed his family.
Yeah, I liked it because I think that they took the storyline far enough to make the point they wanted to make, which is kind of like, if this happened to us, we would probably turn into terrorists too, which I thought was kind of a cool story element.
It was a very interesting story element.
Yeah, but I think they carried it far enough that the fact that he turned back at the end didn't really ruin it, and I think they gave him a good enough reason to.
It was all human reasons. Like, one of the things that an author has got to watch, a screenwriter has got to watch, is you can't turn a character into an idealist proxy. You can't.
Yeah.
It's never genuine. It's not honest. What motivated Frank? Anger, and then later, fear. It wasn't, I am going to strike a blow for the United States, but then, no, I cannot take a life. Like, it wasn't that. He was pissed and wanted to do anything in his power to hurt the people who hurt him, and then he lost his nerve. He chickened out. And both of those are very human. And thus real, and thus honest and earned, whereas Juliana's actions are, frankly, like a bored role player at a table is just rolling dice to decide what to do, which is why she was never compelling and was, frankly, repeatedly annoying.
Yeah.
It's like there was no logic, there was no drive. And another thing I don't like...
There was logic. I would have bought her character if she was 16.
Yeah.
But she was like in her 30s.
Or if he would have just acknowledged that she was a horrible, selfish human being. Like, if people were to just make some comments like, God, you're a terrible person. Like, it would have... you never think of anybody but yourself. Like, that would have at least lended to some narrative continuity. It's this obsession with a protagonist. It's this pretense with a protagonist that the protagonist has to be sympathetic or good. And I would have thought that at the very least, Breaking Bad would have disposed us of that notion.
Yeah.
It's like, it's okay to embrace your protagonist
and Game of Thrones.
Yeah. Well,
and every show that's popular
and like
right now.
I said, look at the characters that we did care about. They're
Nazis.
They're not good
horrible
people. But we're still interested in their story. We want to see if what is the guy's name, the officer?
John Smith.
John, we want to see if he decides to, like, turn against his ideals and save his son. We want to see
watching him play the game. Like,
yeah.
That was extra. Like,
there is this one setup in the show that's just brilliant, and if you saw it, you know what we're talking about. Where he's been perfectly fine with killing people and keeping the Aryan race pure.
Oh, he's ruthless.
He's absolutely ruthless, and it turns out his son has a degenerative disease. And the moment when he figures that out and recognizes that he, as such a powerful general, cannot let his son live. Like, the doctor hands him a syringe, and he's just staring at it. And for this moment, you feel so much empathy with the Nazi. Yeah. Empathy and also just like, yes! Ha! Well, it came back and bit you in the butt.
And also, like the Japanese trade minister. Like, these are the characters I'm interested to see what happens to them in season 2. Like, the main 3 people could blow up. Maybe not Frank. I'd like to say Frank. Frank's done some dumb stuff.
I think Frank is going to turn into a very interesting
At least Frank was honest,
character.
and at least the script was honest about him.
Yeah.
Like, it never tried to tell us that he was something he wasn't. Like,
and Frank's friend was amazing.
The whole Romeo and Juliet thing they have going on with Joe and Julia, I'm just not interested in it. Like, I really don't care if they live or die. But,
no, in fact, I would the show, in my opinion, would be improved if we ripped that Band-Aid off and both of them got killed. Like, just do it. They're not compelling. They're poorly written. Their stories have nowhere to go. But man alive,
dear man in the High Castle writers, if you're listening to us,
do the supporting characters and the supporting actors.
Oh my goodness!
Good lord!
It's really amazingly cast show.
For an example, in the middle of the season, the bounty hunter shows up and literally feasts on the scenery. Like, he is chewing he is masticating that roll like a cow chewing cud. It is so cool to see.
He's a Nazi John Wayne, essentially.
Basically,
as an actor,
not far off.
Like, watching a guy do that. As an actor, watching a guy do that, it was just like, oh my god, talk about a dude who's having a blast and just showing the best part of his art. That was and I think the show is replete with character examples like that. Like, just actors who were in there just bawling out, having a fun time. And I want to see more stories like that.
Well, and add to that the design team and like everything they put into making America 1960
Ranger Reich
slash with all of these Nazi and imperialistic Japanese overtones. They redid the music. Rock and roll never happened.
Yeah, that's another thing. Yeah,
So
I'm a big
everything is
music
this-
person. I love 60s and 70s rock, and it's interesting to see that.
It didn't happen.
Yeah, they shipped all the black people off to Colorado, basically, so it's like there wasn't really any
the design
chance for jazz and blues to influence popular
and then
music.
the little cartoons that they had playing that were just, some of them were classics that like I recognized that were like the Looney Tunes cartoons with the great German classical music underneath them.
Yeah.
The Three Little Pigs and all that. And then there were some other ones like Ranger Reich, the comic book, where you're just looking at that like, oh my gosh.
It's genius.
I want to read Ranger Reich. That would be an interesting.
It's genius.
Interesting
It was
read.
genius setting building, genius world building. So good and so lovingly done. I can even forgive them trying to tell me that John Muir Woods was the Rockies.
That
was rough.
They shot California for Colorado, which they don't look anything alike. But,
yeah, it's hilariously not the same, but forgive me.
But on the other hand, since we all spent quite a bit of time in the Bay Area, it was cool seeing like locations from San Francisco that they had transformed
absolutely.
for this alternate history.
I have physically stood in every spot that that they filmed the major scenes.
Just
in that
about
movie
the addresses of the characters based in San Francisco. I was like, oh yeah, I know where that is.
I've been there.
I could drive there and
pretty cool.
Probably not get lost.
So I mean, I feel like that's a good way to segue. We've taken apart a couple of sort of alternate takes on history. It might be good to segue into a general conversation of what makes an alternate history like.
What makes a good one?
Well,
yeah.
How do you put that together?
I would say that a firm vision and world building is really the top two. Like you look at any Harry Turtledove novel, for example. The two distinguishing factors are he picks his point of divergence. It's never obscure. Like with Harry Turtledove, it's the South gets AK-47s in World War and the Civil War. And
is that actually a Harry Turtledove?
Guns of the South. It's a brilliant novel.
Okay. Is this a magical?
No, time travelers who want the ideals of the Confederacy to prevail in the modern world come back and arm it with modern weaponry.
Okay.
That's terrifying.
Initiate a horrific bloodbath and just nadir of human rights decay that it's a brilliant novel. Harry Turtledove's a genius. If you haven't read him, read him. Oh my god. Fall Britannia is a novel where his flashpoint is the weather never gets bad for the Spanish Armada, and they roll over the British, invade and conquer England. He picks his moment, and then he's all in, though. After that moment, I explore every ramification I can think of.
I think one of the biggest things is don't think like a 19th century historian where all that mattered were politics and war and
or
great
an undergrad.
men. Yeah, or an undergrad. Yeah, don't think about just politics and war and great men. Think about history in terms of
the people who live there.
Average people, society, food,
Weather.
music, art, culture, architecture, dialect, maybe. Like you have to think about how every little detail would change.
Well, and that's the thing is you think of the words that history gets compared to, like tapestry, things like that. Those are the kind of words I hear when I hear we need some grand historical metaphor. It's all inaccurate because it's even more intricate than that. Like the world we lived in.
I don't know. Have you ever looked at a tapestry?
You can clip any one thread and it'll survive. I'm saying the modern world, that is not true.
Yeah.
We have tens of millions of flashpoints that let us here, if not more. Mm-hmm. And that just makes it this ripe playground.
I'm actually going to give a recommendation. Again, this is not a sponsor, although we would love if they sponsor us, but there is
We don't have any sponsors.
No. There's a a great course. It's like a recorded course called The Other Side of History, Daily Life in the Ancient World by Robert Garland that you can get from The Great Courses, which is a company I really like that really does a good job of talking about history, not from the perspective of wars and treaties and great men, but like how would it be to live as an average person in... I think he does definitely ancient Greece, the ancient Near East, the Roman Empire. He talks about Celts. He talks a little bit about the Middle Ages. It's really good if you're trying to build like an on-the-ground personal story, whether it's historical fiction, fantasy, or alternate history.
Great courses can be pretty pricey, but if you are a member of the increasingly surging part of the American population who's a member of Audible, for example.
Again, not a sponsor. We just like them. Please sponsor us.
They're available for use for your Audible credits, which is most definitely the most cost-effective way, because the great courses, they're pretty weighty in terms of the investment. But Audible is a great way to get them. Audible is a great way to keep up with any fiction, or if you're more academically inclined like we are, you could listen to college lectures in your free time.
Okay.
Don't we just sound like fascinating people?
Yeah.
Well, no, I like what you're talking about picking a point and having it be a flashpoint, and that's your change. So, in light of that, I actually have a top 5 challenge for you guys. I've got a couple of lists, a couple of topics, and I want you to give me the top 5 that you can think of that would be interesting to write about or just think about. So, first of all, I mean, and this is the most obvious given the fact that we're talking about sort of alternate history, what would be the top 5 moments to change in history?
You talking about like narratively compelling, or top 5 as in like the world looks the most different if you change those?
Either one.
Okay, go ahead.
All right, I'm going to go chronologically because I already kind of have a thought on this. My number one, like if I could go back as far as possible to change history in a way that would make the world more pleasing to my affinities, Julius Caesar is killed before the Battle of Alesia in the Gallic Wars. Gaul is never Romanized, the Celtic world never falls, and we have basically a Celtic cultural sphere that encompasses Gaul and the British Isles to accompany the Germanic and Latin ones we have right now, instead of the Celts becoming kind of a, not necessarily fringe, but definitely not a geopolitical force. We've got Wales, Ireland, the Highlands of Scotland, and Brittany are basically what's left for the most part. Huh. When at one point they were the dominant cultural force in Europe.
Yeah, so we essentially have the Holy Celtic Empire instead of the Holy
Possibly,
Roman Empire.
yeah. We
might not even ever become holy, frankly.
Yeah.
Probably
the Roman Empire was
the Romans would have probably turned their attention east if they couldn't conquer Gaul, so it might have extended further in that direction.
Which all of a sudden changes China's history.
You need
and
multiple
Japan's
flashpoints. You need multiple flashpoints to bring down the Roman Empire.
I'm not even talking about bringing it down. I'm just
influence.
Yeah, I'm talking about they never conquer Gaul, and therefore the Celtic world, so to speak, doesn't fall. Well, the Germanic invasion still might have wiped it out, but it would be a very different Europe all the same, because
you want to talk about flashpoints that completely alter Europe. I would probably want to narratively explore, and also I am of the school of thought that the following event would have led to a massive change. There are a great many historical minds that I respect greatly who disagree with me, but then again, there are a great many of extremely prestigious and respected academics who do agree with me. I would have had Emir Abdul Rahman have actually known what he was doing and whoop Charles Martel at the Battle of Poitiers, or the Battle of Tours, in 732, and in my opinion would have led to a pretty decent probability that the Muslim forces that had, they'd done what they needed to do in Spain and were doing what they needed to do in other parts of the world, sweep further north, sweep further west, and if we see a Muslim Europe eventually come from the conquering forces of Islam pushing all the way, I think you can talk about the Battle of Tours as one of those things that stopped that from happening. Charles Martel won a great victory that day. Some people think it was just against
sort of a scouting / raiding army. Some people think that the army was a little bit more consequential than that. I hold the belief that had the forces of Islam won a stunning victory that day, whether or not they were a raiding party is kind of inconsequential because it would have led to further incursions, which would have radically, and I do mean radically, altered history. Especially if the Frankish never actually managed to cement themselves as the leading power in their own region. That's a pretty big change. So I picked that as a narratively interesting flashpoint to explore, and you can explore it from either perspective. Either Mir Abdul Rahman is at the head of a conquering army, or he just defeats the Frankish forces and does not feel at all concerned about pushing forward into Frankish lands from that day forward. There are a lot of different ways you could explore, a lot of different magnitudes you could set that event at. I just think it'd be an interesting flashpoint.
Okay, so
Okay.
we've done our top 2. So we have Julius Caesar being killed earlier, not assassinated.
Early in the Gallic Wars.
It could have happened.
Before Alesia, yeah.
It happened a lot to ancient world commanders.
Yeah.
And then we have the
commanders.
Moors not being stopped.
Well, not the Moors. Forces of Islam. It's complicated. There were a lot of different forces
Moors,
of
Saracens, it's all the same thing.
Islam. Yeah. Charles Martel, Charles the Hammer, loses the Battle of Tours / Battle of Poitiers instead of wins it.
Yeah.
All right.
So yeah, my second one would probably be that King Clovis of the Franks never marries Clotilda and therefore never converts to Christianity, which could mean that a good 2/3 of Europe never converts to Christianity. I mean, it still could have gone either way, but he was kind of, or at least Catholicism. There were actually a lot of Germanic Aryan Christians at that point, which would have interesting implications in which, would we still have Aryan Christians around today? But the religious makeup of the world, I believe, would be a lot different if Clovis had not converted, which was kind of a freak thing. Like, people thought if he's going to convert to anything, he's going to convert to Aryan Christianity, not Catholicism. And the fact that he chose Catholicism because of his wife kind of allowed Europe to become Catholic and allowed the Pope to become one of the more powerful people in the world. So I'd love to see what the ramifications of that would be.
Okay.
Yeah.
There we go.
You will radically alter modern history if you change just a couple of things about 1066.
Yes, that's a big one.
1066 is, of course, for those of you who don't know, is the year that the Battle of Hastings was fought. It's where William, Duke of Normandy, defeated Harold Godwinson and brought Norman rule to England, an event that would have such far-reaching consequences, it's literally impossible to list them unless you gave me 6 or 7 hours. But it was also literally a thing of 3 evenly matched forces. Forces of Harold Godwinson of the Saxons, Harold Hardrada of the Scandinavians, and William, Duke of Normandy and his Norman knights.
Well, evenly matched. I think the Norwegians would have been at 1 easily if they hadn't been surprised at Stamford Bridge.
Tactics are part of fighting. They got, as far as I'm concerned, a successful ambush means you got your ass kicked. But on paper, evenly matched. It really was a matter of dates. The Battle of Hastings, I firmly believe, the person to arrive at those battlefields last of the 3 was always going to have a massive advantage. And don't get me wrong, William and his army fought through some adversity in the actual Battle of Hastings. William had to expose himself to danger, to rally his troops to prove he wasn't dead, executed a brilliant fake retreat to win the battle. But hard to say that had William and Harold Godwinson locked horns first, and then, here come the Scandinavians to the party, or any other order thereof. It's hard, in my opinion, not to say that the person who arrived at dinner last doesn't win. And that changes, when you think about how influential the British Empire has been, and when you think about how modern British identity owes just so much of what it is to the Norman conquest.
Yeah,
I think that's a massive flashpoint.
Well, it would if William had not won, it would have severed ties between Britain and the continent. You'd never have the Plantagenets. You'd never have the 100 Years' War. England would probably be more closely associated with Scandinavia and the North Sea. The language we're speaking now would sound extremely different. Yeah, that's a pretty huge one. That probably would have been my third if you hadn't brought it up first.
That's one.
Yeah.
That's a classic one.
Yeah.
I mean, Creasy would agree.
Yeah, so my third, I'll go a little bit more modern with it and say that Great Britain does not join World War I on the Entente side.
Good one.
Because if that had not been the case, the Central Powers might have very well won World War I. We don't.
What's your flashpoint? Why don't they join? Does Germany
Just
not invade Belgium?
they agree. They agree to the Germany's entreatment that they're kindred nations and they should be on the same side. And
I would say that Germany could have very well modified the Schlieffen Plan or adopted a new strategy that didn't involve compromising Belgian neutrality, which was the really large
That's
reason.
true. And the way that they treated the Belgians with collective punishment and everything polarized everyone, including the U.S., against them.
And ironically,
yeah.
you could argue that even beyond Britain not joining and eventually obviously contributing a massive amount to Germany's inevitable defeat, the Schlieffen Plan was such a precise instrument. That's the German offensive plan to end World War I in the West. It got bogged down a little bit in Belgium, a little bit in Liège, and I wonder, or Liège, I don't really know how to pronounce it. I wonder what would have happened had they just done a full-on headlong offensive across the French frontier without any English interference. It might have gone better for them, frankly.
Well, and the interesting thing about it is I think that the next couple decades actually unfold a fair bit less darkly than they did in actual history. Because if Germany wins World War I, they don't have, the ruinous treaties that ruin their economy. We probably wouldn't see the rise of the Nazis. We wouldn't have, looking for someone to blame and deciding to blame the Jews, which led to the Holocaust. So we'd have a very strong, German, Austro-Hungarian empire in Central Europe, but I don't necessarily know that we would have the horrors of World War II.
There's definitely some imprecise extrapolation that has to occur. I don't think that Germany was I don't think that the Second Reich under Kaiser Wilhelm was a lesser evil. They were extremely militaristic, extremely brutal, and extremely ambitious. So their victory in World War I could have definitely gone down a dark path, but it is definitely a less easy course to chart.
Well, I think they were more moderate, if it's possible to say that. They didn't have the radical ideas.
They weren't the Nazis
about racial purity and everything that were allowed to rise in Germany because of the economic conditions and the hatred of foreign powers.
We had a Europe that was precariously balanced from the days of Napoleon's fall, frankly. Great wars were kind of inevitable. It's really just which form did they take and which ended up being more disastrous for which groups. It's unfortunate, but
it would have gone much poorer for France and Serbia. I can say that much.
Well, there wouldn't be a Serbia.
You guys get one more.
Okay, so Dylan's got one more.
All right. You know what? I would say I would change a changed outcome of the Civil War is so interesting as from an American history standpoint, and given how America's a young country, but paramount in its role in modern history. If the outcome of the American experience changes, the world looks different. There's really no nation more crucial to the 20th and 21st century than the United States in terms of the direction the world took. And it's hard to say that if the South somehow pulls it off, everything doesn't look wicked different today, mainly just because it would have seriously delayed the advent of an American superpower. The House divided would not have been as strong as the House united. But here's the thing. As a Civil War buff, I really can't find the flashpoint. I don't think the war ends in the Confederacy's favor if Lee wins Gettysburg. I don't actually think that the Confederacy was ever really in it with a chance to win the Civil War.
Well,
if France had come.
Yeah, if Europe got
If
involved
Europe got
in the
involved.
south and
Yeah.
there was like some sort of like Spanish flu pandemic
That-
in the north, maybe.
That is the single best flashpoint, the
Yeah.
single best one that I can come up with that I think gives great odds of a Confederate victory are a Lee and Jackson smash in Antietam or Sharpsburg. Delays the Emancipation Proclamation. It's a victory on northern soil. The Brits and the French probably get involved at that point, at least in some way, shape, or form. Now the Union is up against it, as opposed to the South being really, 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 really up against it, which that alters the dynamic of things, and that might even change world history a little bit, because maybe they negotiate some sort of peace or.
What does the world look like at that point? I've got to think Russia would be the global superpower, because who could really challenge them in
Russia
the 20th
ever,
century?
would they
I don't
have
know
ever
that they
been
have the infrastructure even.
Yeah, I don't know if that changes anything
but-
about the Russo-Japanese conflict or anything
But if
like
they
that.
were,
though.
I mean, they were in second place in the Cold War, and if there's no USA to be in first, then who else is going to challenge them?
Germany would be the only thing I could
Okay,
think of.
that's true, because if-
ascendant Prussia. The Civil War happened in 1860, and Germany was united in 1871. So Prussia was knocking on the door of that ambition being fulfilled. Either way, it really alters world history. It's funny, though, the Civil War, I hesitate to say it, though, because its outcome, while not inevitable, was always really tilted in the North's favor. And there is no easy flashpoint to tilt it to the South. It's actually it's an interesting... Because everyone likes to say Gettysburg. Gettysburg is the popular, like, Lee wins Gettysburg and the South wins the... They forget that the South was getting, quite frankly, like, beaten in a Mike Tyson style in the West. The North was completely ascendant, totally dominant in the West. Vicksburg fell as the Battle of Gettysburg was won, which was arguably the more decisive occurrence in the Battle of Gettysburg. I just don't think Confederate victory at Gettysburg ends the war. Not with the war in the West going so well. So I think the flashpoint you really have to hone down on as like the certain game changer is a smashing victory for Lee at Antietam that cows Lincoln into keeping his mouth shut on the slavery issue and brings in some variety of European intervention. That is probably your moment for the Confederacy to achieve something major in that conflict. Whether that is independence or not, who's to say? But I think it looks different if, say, a nation of England is like, all right, you two, kiss and make up. You know, that's very different. It's a very different final picture than a complete victory by the Republicans in the North and radical Reconstruction and...
Yeah. Chloe is just now realizing what she got herself into by telling us to discuss alternate history scenarios.
Oh, no,
I'm
I
thinking
figured-
it was going to be a quick little segment.
I figured it would be this. I figured it would be this way, actually. Although I had like 10 others, but I don't think we're gonna get to them
Just
today.
go to them. We have editing power.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I think I'm going to save some of them. Okay, the one thing that I do want to hear, because this is slightly more lighthearted, you each get to pick 3.
Okay.
Dumbest military trends.
My number 1 is the uniforms from like the 16th century onward, up until about World War I.
They cease to be practical.
If you look at soldiers up to the end of the Middle Ages, they look awesome. They look, they're clad in metal, like chainmail, plate mail, scale mail, whatever. They've usually got like a pretty badass looking helmet on.
And suddenly pantaloons.
The weapons look cool. If you look World War I and onward, they look kind of like, more modern. They look like commandos, like someone you wouldn't want to mess with the fatigues. You get camouflage and stuff. That in-between period, it just all looks like a ridiculous cartoon. Like, it's all these, like, bright colors and puffy sleeves and, like I hate...
My hat is bigger than your hat, sir.
I hate the military uniforms from like 1550 up to like 1900. I think they look stupid. They look ridiculous. They don't look like soldiers. They look like they're going to march in some weird parade.
Well, they did. They marched in many parades.
I actually voiced this on one point on Twitter, and Rob Zkackney of the 3 Moves Ahead podcast replied, "Yeah, TJ, God forbid anyone go to battle looking like anything besides a heavy metal album cover." Which is a pretty accurate criticism of my point. I do judge quite a bit based on whether or not you look like you could be on a heavy metal album cover.
Well, didn't some of the colors have, like, practical purpose because they needed to actually be able to see from, like, a hilltop where their guys were?
Well, and it was also, it had something to do with the democratization of the military, frankly.
I agree. They by and large, they look kind of
For example, folks, using a sword, using an axe, as a guy who knows how to use both, it requires a decent bit of training. I am not very good at using any of the above, and have worked at my melee blade work for years, and I still suck. So when you think about the knight, the man-at-arms, it's a lifetime worth of training that goes to making a competent soldier. Well, the firearm changed things a little bit, and it was, here, Mr. Illiterate Low IQ Man, this is what you do. A child can do it, point and shoot.
Yeah.
Not to criticize all the soldiers back then, but it was certainly, it was unifying. Now, all of a sudden, you did not have to be this frankly landed gentry who could afford to be trained. Although the English did, they shook it up a little bit with the bowmen, to be fair. But you didn't have to be able to afford expensive equipment or expensive training. Your government just needed to arm you with a single weapon and train you for about 3 months, and you were a fairly competent soldier. You needed a manual of drill, and you needed a style of uniform that catered to that kind of army, though. You need them shooting at the right people. You need them knowing who to line up beside.
I could just imagine that memo.
Well, you need to take a lot of the complexity out of war, like line up, reload, shoot. It was for the benefit of people who were not soldiers, who were not full-time trained combat professionals, who were literally farmers, potters, merchants, peasants, who were given a gun and told to go serve their country. War had been democratized, but it required some changes in thinking in order to serve that kind of people. Mm-hmm. And I will tally on my point at the end of it. Man, I really, really wish that drill manuals and battle manuals and stratagems would have got with the times after frickin' Napoleon. Because with the advent of the mini-ball, the rifled musket, more accurate cannons, and then later, yes, machine guns in World War I, we would have thought that the days of lining up en masse and charging en masse would end a little bit quicker.
That's a pretty good one. Yeah.
We get Pickett's Charge, we get Gravello and the Franco-Prussian War, we get the Battle of the Marne and the Battle of the Frontiers, we get people dying by the hundreds of thousands. And we're not talking like Stalingrad levels of sustained engagement. Stalingrad was this brutal conflict in the 1940s, but these guys were at grips for months. Like the Russians and the Germans were fighting each other constantly in this city. Gettysburg was 3 days, all right? It was 3 days and not continuous fighting over the course of those 3 days. Gravello was a day. The Battle of the Marne was about a month, or, that whole last stand to save France. And the casualty numbers are just sickening.
It's fun. Like reading a lot of accounts of early World War I battles. It just seems like they're sitting around playing a strategy game that they have no idea how it works.
The units are completely expendable.
It's like, what happened? Shit. Well, let's not do that anymore. What else can we try? Let's do this.
That's the
okay,
same
what
thing.
happened? Shit.
Well, it's
then
funny,
eventually
right?
somebody lands on move and fire shock trooper tactics, which is what we still use today.
Those tactics almost altered the outcome of, for example, World War I. Like, yeah. I hate the French are wusses stereotypes, and I even heard a guy bring up like an example, like the French were on the verge of a psychological breakdown in 1917. They didn't want to fight anymore.
Yeah, because their country had been
like,
freaking leveled.
Good Lord!
Yeah.
Look at what they had been through. Look at what they had suffered. Look at the losses. Look at your likelihood if you were in a group of 10 men. How many of those 10 men were destined to become casualties? It was horrific. And a lot of that was that tactics just did not get with the times fast enough. Thank you, James Longstreet. And that's a stupid trend that I wish would have gone another way. I think we would have saved a lot of human lives, but who knows the consequences of that later. But a lot of people died that didn't have to, especially from, I want to say, the Mexican-American War onward to about 1918, frankly.
TJ? I mean, I was actually wondering if elephants would rank up there.
Elephants were actually
extremely useful,
tactically effective, they were a strategic burden, because if you try to march them somewhere that's far away and also that isn't a place where elephants are supposed to live, a lot of them are going to die. Like, most of the elephants that Hannibal tried to bring across the Alps died, but they can be extremely effective ultra-heavy shock cavalry. They're also not as obedient or domesticated as horses, so a lot of times they'd end up trampling their own side.
That's useful.
So, yeah, I don't think I'd call elephants a dumb military trend. Some of the ways people tried to use elephants wasn't maybe the smartest. Like, trying to march them across Switzerland.
There were, however, notable battles in which elephants played a pretty decisive role.
Yeah. Well, especially if you look at the Near East and India, a lot of Indian military history is elephants played a big role there, and they can actually be excellent pack animals, which is something people forget about.
Sense.
Like,
yeah.
A lot of why cavalry became so dominant in Europe in the Middle Ages is because you could get people to the battle faster, not necessarily because they were, running these daring cavalry charges every single battle. A lot of times it was for transportation, and elephants, sort of the same thing.
I mean, just to dovetail minorly from cavalry, I think another one I'd say was, frankly, the Crusades, and not for any political or religious notion, but for the notion of trying to project your power when your power primarily consists of heavy armored cavalry.
Yeah.
1,000 miles east was never going to really work. Frankly, the Crusades were never going to be successful. You can't, nations like France, the Spanish kingdoms, the German kingdoms, projecting that kind of power, the power that would have been necessary that far away in that era, when travel was still that difficult. It was like, I'm looking at that going, how did anyone ever logistically think this was going to work? And I know that like religious thinking and political thinking were by far the more important of the factors there, and that is a long discussion. I just look at that decision on paper going, I really don't know how you guys ever thought that was going to go any other way, marching tens of thousands of heavily armored knights into the desert to do battle with the natives.
I could even tag on, to be more specific, the Fourth Crusade is probably one of the dumbest things that's ever happened in history.
Probably.
The Venetians convinced the Crusaders to sack Constantinople, which was a Christian city. It wasn't a Catholic city. But they basically probably were ultimately the cause of the fall of the Byzantine Empire. We might still have a Roman Empire in existence today if the Fourth Crusade had not totally fucked up Constantinople.
And we might.
Yeah.
Just a lot of interesting decisions went on with the Crusades, so I would definitely tack that on.
I love there's a meme that's like a Facebook post from Enrico Dandolo, who's like the leader of the Venetians during that era. He's like, hey guys, I just told the Crusaders to sack Constantinople and they actually did it, LOL.
So speaking of sacking things, I wanted to actually get this a little bit lighter. So I have a challenge for you two.
Okay.
And the challenge is this. You each get to pick 3 United States presidents.
Okay.
And for the sake of it being funny, I'm going to open it up to anybody who is currently still in the race. Because it's a potential
for 2016?
For 2016,
okay.
Yes. You each get 3 presidents, and your objective is to get the One Ring to Mount Doom.
Okay.
So you need a fellowship that will get it there. Assuming we're starting at the Council of Elrond, and all of the presidents of the United States are there.
It's going to be just these 3 guys trying to get it to Mount Doom.
Just these 3 guys.
Okay. So are we allowed to pick the same person? Or are we going to do this like a draft style?
Yeah, draft style.
Okay, so who goes first? Because I think there's an obvious best candidate that we're both going to want to take.
TJ gets to go first.
Got it.
I mean, people are going to say this is stereotypical, but my first one's got to be Teddy Roosevelt. He was an outdoorsman. He had a lot of... he had military experience. He had experience facing daunting odds and acting boldly in situations where other commanders would have, been more conservative. Spent a lot of time in the woods. He spent a lot of time walking and camping. I think he's the obvious ring bearer as far as I'm concerned. I in terms of my next one I'll go on to who could actually hold the ring. Yeah,
I will pick in place of my Aragorn, Legolas, and Gimli. If I can't have Teddy Roosevelt, I'll take John F. Kennedy. War hero, physically robust man.
Yeah.
Replete with history of his military history. He's a credit to the country. Achieved amazing things in the theater of war, and had a lot of character in certain ways. And I think that he would have been able to unite behind that common goal. And we had very few, frankly, warrior presidents in our history, like guys with a history of getting stuff done on the ground.
It was a couple hobbits that got the ring to Mount Doom in the first place.
Yeah,
so let's
but
remember
they don't survive the Battle of Amon Hen without Aragorn, Legolas, Gimli, etc. So they needed, especially in the first book, they needed some fighting to be done for them on more than one occasion. And if I can't have Teddy, I think I'd pick Kennedy.
Okay. So I'm trying to think who would actually carry the ring and be able to resist the corruption. I think Abe Lincoln is kind of the obvious choice.
Brianna's over here raising her.
I was gonna say
high moral character and a dedication to ideals. Again, I'm picking the super obvious ones, not the history nerd ones, because I'm admittedly not as much of an American history buff as Dylan is. I'm more world history, so. He's probably going to have more interesting answers than I do, but yeah, I think if I'm having to put the ring on the chain and give it to someone, I'd probably trust Abe Lincoln of all the presidents that I am familiar with to carry it to Mount Doom without being tempted to put it on and screw the whole thing up.
See, Abe Lincoln would have been my number 2 choice. Number 1 reason being, he did some pretty dictatorial things when the Civil War got Civil War-y, that I think show some compromise to a baser character, especially when times got tough.
Yeah.
But he was a very high character man, had a big vision for the country, and we want to talk about myopic focus on doing what needs to be done. Like for him, it was
also physically robust. He was a wrestler. You know.
For him, it was restoring the Union. If he needed to save the free peoples of Middle Earth, I have no doubt he could be just as dogged. So I think that's a good... I would pick Jimmy Carter to bear the ring.
I'd agree with that.
Not an amazing president. I don't care if this is a controversial statement. An amazing man. Possibly the best human being to ever hold office in our country. His post-presidential career, his presidential career is full of some stuff, but his post-presidential career, he has been a global force for good. An amazing representative of the United States as a diplomat. Habitat for Humanity. Continues to inspire people the world over. Just a seriously high character human being.
And the organization he supports just eradicated guinea worm, which is the first major human disease to be eradicated from the face of the earth since smallpox. That was pretty recent.
So if I had to put in my ring on a guy I thought would be most incorruptible, most upstanding, and who could also handle a heavy task, knowing that it was for the right reasons, I'm confident that Jimmy Carter from the late 70s would have done just fine.
Gotcha.
Jimmy Carter now would have obviously had a little bit of trouble, so I'm thinking that when he was in office.
Let's see. It's hot. I guess the obvious third choice might be Washington, just because he led a lot of guys through desperate situations in desperate conditions in a time when victory seemed far from assured. Again, it's a super obvious choice, but I think he might make a good sort of leader of the expedition. He was an inspiring general, if not the most tactically brilliant general of all time. That's a point we could argue for quite a while.
I don't think anyone could argue that he was a genius on the battlefield, but he was an extremely inspiring.
Yeah, he was a rallying figure. I kind of see him as sort of my Aragorn. He's the one that's going to encourage everyone to keep pushing on. I think he'd be my third.
I find a trope that is common in fantasy is often fighting fire with fire. To beat the darkness, you have to confront it with darkness. So my third member is going to be
George
The
W. Bush.
the OG, the 10th ring wraith, Mr. Richard Nixon. Oh yeah. No one messes with Dick Nixon. Tricky Dick would know the back way through Mordor. He would. He's a brilliant politician. As long as we didn't
He'd
tell
probably sit down with the Nazgul and be like, dude, guys, that's how we're doing it.
Let's make this happen. I hate you and everything you stand for, and it's either a lifetime of proxy wars or you led us to Mount Doom. No, also, though, think about it this way. As long as the debate wasn't televised, I would put that guy up against Sauron any day of the week. That dude was a brilliant debater as long as people couldn't see his sweaty, unattractive form.
Well, I mean, if he's next to Sauron, Sauron's like a flaming eyeball, so you just have...
You're also assuming that we've somehow...
explain away the sweat right there.
You're also assuming that somehow we've gotten the orcs to accept democracy, and Sauron is allowing this election to be held.
Richard Nixon makes the orcs accept democracy.
I think
Richard
Sauron,
Nixon exports democracy at the point of a bayonet, son.
I think Sauron is firmly committed to a single-party government farm that he is the leader of.
But Richard Nixon would be staunchly dedicated to stopping the spread of Mordor orcism, of the One Ringism. He would opt for a strategy of containment. He would probably contact the dwarves and the elves and be like, we need some proxy wars.
That's what Gondor did in the Second Age. They basically were like, Mordor built this wall, we're going to put our guys on it and not let them out. So,
Yeah, I mean, I think we talk about the hero that we need and not the hero that we deserve. I really think Richard Nixon could be an outside pick.
Okay.
For hero we need.
Okay.
He is cunning, swift of mind, and riddled with phlebitis. So, a good Republican.
So, bonus question: who for each of you is your Smeagol?
Smeagol.
Your Gollum.
Oh, that's
interesting. The person who actually jumps into the lava.
It has nothing to do with like his character, or his presidency, or his personality, or anything. But for some reason, I just find it amusing the idea of James Madison, who's like 5'4" or something like that, jumping on Abe Lincoln's back and biting his finger off to take the ring and then fall into the lava.
We can't.
So DM, what's yours?
I will say Millard Filmore. That dude's been waiting for some glory.
What did he even do?
He was technically president when Matthew Perry opened up Japan, if I recall correctly.
Wasn't his presidency really short though? Like
one term.
Yeah.
I think so. I think that's correct. That might not actually be correct. One second, Millard. Let's look him up. Let's look up Millard Filmore.
Back when you could still name a guy Millard.
You just picked somebody that you don't even know.
I think he would be glory hungry and would be prone to do some pretty rash shit. That's what I'm saying.
Yeah, he's probably like one of the five most
look at that. He kind of looks like Gollum. I mean, look at that.
He does. I'll put a picture up online
for
you guys.
Not an attractive man. He had to follow Zachary Taylor, so...
That's right, yeah, because I think... Didn't Taylor die and then he served like what was left of that term and then didn't get reelected?
I didn't know he was an anti-slavery moderate. Okay, so there's that. Maybe he's a bad choice. He might not have actually been crazy enough to do anything. It actually sounds like, based on what I'm reading, he was fairly sane and utterly uninspiring. Not a good thing to be in the 1850s.
I'm just gonna put this out there. I'm really impressed that nobody picked Trump as their Gollum.
I was just gonna say
Trump is way too self-centered.
Trump would be Sauron. He wouldn't be Gollum. No, Trump would be Denethor. He would be the crazy steward of Gondor who's like, we're gonna build a wall, we're gonna make Mordor pay for it, we're gonna,
The orcs, they don't send the best of them. They send the worst of them. They're murderers. They're rapists. They're conquerors. Some of them, I assume, are good fallen elves. Trump would not have obsessed over the One Ring, though. If it was like the One Mirror, he would have obsessed over it. But not the One Ring.
Is shiny. The ring is shiny.
Well, let's throw this question in there. If you guys had to pick Trump as part of your fellowship,
you're stuck with him.
You're stuck with him. What role would he play?
He'd probably want to play Gandalf and end up.
Well, that's the thing. I wouldn't. That's what I'd be like. Yeah, you get to fall down the pit with the Balrog. That's your role in the story.
It's gonna be huge. I'm gonna beat up the
Balrog.
fools! I'm gonna beat up the Balrog. He's a loser. It's gonna be you.
Comes back with white hair. It's still the same ridiculous hairdo, but it's white.
I will strike at my enemy. I will smote him on the mountainside, and it's gonna be huge. Nah, man. If I had to. Yeah, I think he'd probably get himself killed fairly early just because of his myopia and narcissism. So I don't know.
And
this is why we're losing to China.
I think that's about all we have time for today.
That was a politically incorrect disaster.
We want to talk about Chronicles.
Yes, no, really quick. I wanted to actually have TJ give us a little bit of a preview of what he's thinking of for Chronicles because we're all really excited to see what's happening.
So
that's
that's sort of our own Loresworn alternate history project to keep with the theme of the alternate history episode. And basically, what I am doing is playing through. What is it, like 1,200 years, 1,400 of human history in Paradox's strategy games, basically Crusader Kings 2, Europa Universalis 4, and Victoria 2, which extend from 769 AD to 1935. And you can actually play a continuous save file across all three of those games. It is what is called a mega campaign in the Paradox community, and I'm going to be writing a history course, a fake history course about the fake world that is created over the course of this playthrough, including fake written and archaeological sources, and quite a bit of research and time is going into this. Probably you won't see the first entry until like May or June, because pre-production is going to take up months of time.
But if you're interested, we're playing a bunch on Twitch. We've been doing some Crusader Kings and some other games, so you can sort of see the world as it's getting built.
That's and not actually true. The file we're playing on Twitch is completely separate from the Chronicle one.
Okay, but they can still watch us on Twitch.
Yes, they can still watch us on Twitch.
Still interesting.
Yeah, we're streaming Crusader Kings. We're planning on streaming some XCOM. That's twitch.tv/Loresworn Order, which again we'll put in the description because it's not the most radio-friendly grouping of sounds, Loresworn Order.
Oh, no worries. We'll make sure you guys have all the tools you need to follow us.
Yeah, absolutely. And that is it for us today, unless, TJ, you have any final words?
I really don't. I passed that 3-second threshold where it's like if I was going to think of something really clever really fast, it would have happened by now. So you have to tag out. Yeah.
Tag out, Dion?
Yeah. No, I'm good.
All right.
So thanks for joining us this week. As always, you can find us online at loresworn.com. On Twitter, we are Loresworn Order. We're also at twitch.tv/Loresworn Order.
We'll see you next month. Bye-bye.